Introduction. By definition, surveillance means to keep a watch over someone or something, usually a suspect or a prisoner. From the latter, we can easily understand the connection between the notions of fear and surveillance. Being observed by someone could connotate with them stepping on one's freedom. Throughout this text and the document we found, we learn more about the different aspects of surveillance and were enlightened on why we, as citizens, should be aware of the power it can have over us.
When we talk about surveillance, we have to contextualize the subject in the beginning of the 20th century. The globalization process had a great impact on different societies. We often talk here about a risk society, which involves several issues. It all starts when the feeling of nation-states decreases. Globalization has brought many economic benefits, but has also brought what are more commonly known as side effects of the industrial process. This is what German sociologist Ulrich Beck describes as a risk society because of the emphasis on security. The social bets become more important than the good ones, so there is a collection of different forms of fear due to the fact that we live in a generation of knowledge, according to Beck. Surveillance is gathering information to prevent change. It could be considered as a form of manipulation because today it is mostly about collecting data and information. It is mainly used as moral dissuasion or intimidation, which is why there are many authoritarian states and institutions that rely on this kind of surveillance. French historian Michel Foucault says that surveillance is now used in many sectors, such as school, military camps, and construction of modern space, which implies subjectivity. The Industrial Revolution is linked with the neoliberal and capitalist impact on the society and has also brought a new technical way of collecting data that is based on machines and not humans. The work in labor allowed in a geographical aspect the rural exodus on the one hand, and on the other hand, the production line of workers was a potential harm that can be done to people. So, the organizational risk has tried to define a new form of calculation because the society uses and needs more and more data to anticipate or predict potential events. It's a way of anticipating what can happen and trying to find answers to potential problems that may come. Surveillance is used here to display in favor of probable events in order to prevent a real one. We could find our hypothesis of a sort of manipulation because it generates a legitimate fear in a culture of fear, according to David Murakami Wood. Nevertheless, there are two ways of establishing a surveillance. In one part, the targeted way, and in another part, the mass surveillance. But nowadays, the most useful is a massive one because of many factors. It gives an overview and could be required because of it. There are no specificities. For example, a video surveillance in urban street is a mass surveillance, but the same system can be used to target a particular person. The same person would have had a roast on his behavior or the recognition software. This way of monitoring people on the urban area is called the surveillance society, and it is the primary mode of social ordering. After the Cold War, 1945 until 1990, a wave of cinematography about infiltration and spies saw its rise. This is a generation of Bourne, a series of films based on action spy thriller films. A new form of intelligence emerged, and its new methods that can reach places geographically intelligibly initially. The high-tech system brought a new possibility on location and helped the globalization of surveillance. Hidden geography of espionage. In Eastern Germany, during the Cold War, 1 of 6 of the population were registered and be up to inform the state about the internal security of the country. What is fascinating here is that anyone could be a spy and be spied at the same time. They hide cameras in each object used in our everyday life. We can also find here a much more sociological aspect in the sense that it allows to see who and what frequent the places and to raise a form of marginality of certain social class. Neil Smith talked about a revenge urbanism. Otherwise, in UK, where the CCTV has prolified, has shown that in public places, number of crimes has decreased. But paradoxically, only a small percentage of street cameras help the police to solve street crimes with the video of surveillance. So here we could ask ourselves to what extent CCTV is used in our society. In the USA, the FBI had illegally monitoring radical student groups such as black and indigenous and civil rights activists to use them as informers and infiltrators. The most dangerous with this way of doing is centrally the fact that they don't need a prerogative of the state to do it. Then, the surveillance is used by some private companies to different ends. The first geographical important place where people encounter surveillance is in workplace, because it is especially from an economic point of view that the advantage is to watch over its worker. Indeed, they take advantage on their human labor, increasing efficiency and maximizing the profit. The CCTV is also allows in the American malls to prevent when the stocks of goods are exhausted to see the number of influxes within the shop. Surveillance is also seen as an economic tool in the hands of capitalists with the use of CCTV, closed-circuit television. For example, the Cold War brought many chains that allowed the military industry to flourish economically. The corporate involved in military supplies and provision thanks to the growing fear of crime in the risk society. The neoliberal capitalism used this globalization of surveillance as a globalization of fear in risk society. To go further, the terrorist attack in 9/11 used surveillance technology not just to prevent terrorism, but also the fear of immigration and infiltration. To conclude, we could say that nowadays surveillance is in general shining all over the world because of its general representation. It became an imaginary world of symbol of success in any global city. There are today some cities such as Alphaville, which is a whole private city with some private security guard and intelligent entry system with digital surveillance. Of course, now it is not just representing more than a primary need of feeling safe, but it is also an economical luxury.
Beyond CCTV, we have new forms of surveillance. There are three very different forms of surveillance that represent both the globalization of it and its movement to the domain of the virtual as well as the material. So firstly, we have drones, also known as UAVs. They are unmanned aerial vehicles, which are commonly known as drones, which basically are aircrafts without a human pilot aboard. They can be used for several things such as delivery, shooting video, racing, agriculture, law enforcement, war, and surveillance. The latter are two important things which tie into our topic. In terms of surveillance, they can be used to monitor things, people, and or places. Regulations may limit the range of drone usage in business and civilian surveillance. Some of them have been used in certain situations, such as protests, in order to capture what's going on. However, drones are even used by the military, who sometimes even arms them with missiles in order to attack enemy soldiers and terrorists. They are practical because they allow operators to control situations from a certain distance. Drones illustrate the complex scalar geographies of socio-technical systems. An example of drone usage in surveillance could be demonstrated by the Black Hornet Nano, which is a UAV that is used by the Norwegian and British armies and the armed forces of Germany. The aircraft was used by soldiers in the UK's Brigade Reconnaissance Force at Camp Bastion in Afghanistan, more precisely through the Operation Herrick, where personnel in Afghanistan deployed the Black Hornet from the front line to fly into enemy territory and take video and still images before returning to the operator. Through this, it gave them a clear image of what was going on. However, it has been withdrawn from service in 2016. Secondly, we have border crossings. Border crossings have grown in power as nation-state declines. Border control is the measure which is taken by a country in order to monitor or regulate its borders. They are put in place to control the movement of people, animals, and goods into as well as out of a country. These places are controlled through border checkpoints. The globalization that has occurred in recent times causes the border to be everywhere, in a way, and this leads these places to have their own internal geographies of human and baggage scanners, interrogation rooms, and deportation areas. Through this, border crossing is now the focal point between state and private sector surveillance, as information can be taken from various sources and combined to build profiles on people and groups. This basically ties the knot between the virtual and the material world in a way. An example of these profiles that are built can be demonstrated by the TSC, also known as the Terrorist Screening Center, which is administered by the FBI. And it's basically a U.S. government which is consolidated through counterterrorism, watchlisting components, and is responsible for the management and operation of the terrorist screening database, which is commonly known as the watch list. Through this, they put several people's profiles under surveillance in order to identify known or suspected terrorists who are attempting to obtain visas to enter the country and to board an aircraft or engage in other activities. And finally, we have social networks and the Web 2.0, where users spend a given amount of time creating online exhibitions or different aspects of their lives and identities for their followers or friends or acquaintances or whatnot. These things make it quite easy for people to share information about their friends and acquaintances without or with their consent. And this leaves many people to being prone to being monitored without their knowledge. For instance, users tend to admit that Facebook, amongst other social platforms, is not a charitable service, but rather a major transactional corporation with a market value reaching $479.4 billion. And it's the revenue that comes from targeted advertising, video messaging, and selling data. The information that is generated through the surveillance of Facebook users is stored and connected in order to build up social graphs of users, thus creating data which can be vital for marketing and brandscaping. In addition to that, many of these platforms have been adding locative systems in their software. Although that is mostly voluntary and consensual, the question of who can precisely see this information is slightly unclear. The data can be mined by intelligence agencies and by other companies which specialize in social media surveillance.
Emerging trends in surveillance. In this paragraph, we learn that surveillance systems are visible in our day-to-day life. Moreover, surveillance techniques never stop to improve themselves and are now able to do what is called mass surveillance. The distribution of the information that mass surveillance gives us is a representation of how the surveillance spread in a space but also grew more intense than ever. It also shows a larger distribution of surveillance gear and systems and eventually creates new actors in the surveillance business, such as private or public ones. Surveillance has an obvious social impact, insofar as surveillance systems that are based on the actuarial logic, meaning that they are based on the potential risks that places or individuals or groups represent. These surveillance systems increase the already existing social gap between classes. It means that if a certain social class of a population is being more observed than another, it will create inequalities that will add up to the pile of other inequalities already existing between these social classes. Finally, the evolution of surveillance equipment that allow one to observe a place or a group of people even when being in a different country made possible for unqualified volunteers all over the globe to observe and report the people they would find suspicious, and without reporting them to the competent services, but directly to the private society that set up the system and hired them. As a consequence, it leads people to make justice themselves and allow the creation of small spying agencies. Conclusion of the text. In a nutshell, this document shows the main effects that surveillance has over a society and to what aim it is used. By setting surveillance systems in strategic places, one can observe different components of a society, such as its behavior, its inequalities, and even its fears. Surveillance is also mainly used for political purposes, such as border crossings regulations and military strategies. Last but not least, it is an economic tool insofar as workers of a given society are watched over in order to put pressure on them. To sum up, surveillance is a powerful weapon to use with caution.
Surprising that schools and employers, police departments, security companies, other government departments, they are all also very interested in the world of social media personal data. Take employers, for example. It is sobering to realize that an increasing number of employers use social media in addition to the conventional resume. Perhaps I should say it should be sobering. Do you realize that 76% of the photos on Facebook in Britain show users in an inebriated state? So you may wonder what is going on when you think about how other people are using those data that we put up there. Some employers, for example, are now asking applicants if they can have their Facebook passwords so that they can see for themselves. So much for your privacy settings. Social media is driven by what you might call a market logic. And the market logic is there trying to create categories, trying to make profiles of us, trying to find out what they can so that they can put together a composite picture of who we are. But of course, Facebook was a gift for that, and other social media too, because instead of them having to dream up the categories, we contribute to those categories and to the categorization. So every time that we post some image, every time that we make a post online, we are contributing something about our tastes, our preferences, what our musical tastes are, what our sporting tastes are. They are interested, of course, in the things that we eat, so food preferences, in political affiliations, in religious commitments, you name it. The process of making those categories is something to which we contribute. We are helping them. And of course, it's the categories that give the clues. We can have our privacy settings really high, but anybody who is trolling through those data and trying to find out about us can make a composite picture of us from the preferences and tastes and habits of our friends. So on Facebook, you see your friends betray you. However, those categories don't necessarily fit how we might want to see ourselves. So our visibility to the world, to those organizations, to those corporations, and so on, our visibility may not be the way that we would want necessarily to present ourselves. The technologic behind it may be somewhat misleading. But that's only the beginning. I was asking the question then, well, is it them surveilling us? And I want to go beyond that and suggest that there's something more going on. I want to suggest that today, we are also doing the surveillance. Social media, of course, is all about sharing, about connecting with others, about keeping in touch with our friends, and maybe also finding out a little bit about our friends. Indeed, the Vision Critical polling company in Canada, along with the Surveillance Studies Centre at Queen's University, did a little survey of 1,000 Canadians, 1,000 Americans, 1,000 Brits in the summer of 2012, and found this, that more than a third of respondents in all three countries admitted to doing what they called tracking and monitoring others online. Well, we thought that could just be a leading question. 30% seems rather high, and so we asked other questions as well. We asked, for example, how the people who did this thought that those whom they were watching without their knowledge would feel about it. More than half in each case said that the persons would be embarrassed or unhappy if they knew that they were being tracked and monitored in that way. So there's something different going on here. We don't want to just talk about the corporations and police departments that want to know about us. And from my vantage point, I would say that we are seeing here an element in an emerging surveillance culture.
In this TED Talk, David Lyon talks about how social media can become a threat to our own well-being. In reality, there's a very fine line between monitoring, surveilling, and stalking. This is why social networking is looked at by schools in a professional setting, by employers, or even by various organizations. What's interesting is to look at is the different ways that David Lyon explains the impact that social media surveillance can have on our day-to-day lives. It's almost as if we don't think about how scary all this can be unless we take a deeper look at it. In reality, we're quite insignificant as individuals, but we do have a greater impact on the way that we can become a statistic, or that we can become a part of a statistic. Most of us use social media for a reason or another, whether it can be to share parts of our lives, to meet new people, to keep in touch with people who are near and far. We share various information without necessarily realizing it, and what's truly unhealthy is that we unknowingly contribute to being categorized by a system which steals parts of our identities to make profit off of them. Lyon says that we are helping them make money and create a consumer society through sharing our preferences from multiple perspectives, whether religious, culinary, or political. Following the market logic in a predominantly capitalistic society, these companies besmirch our right to privacy. Thus, this aspect of fear comes into play through the analysis of this data, which can result in an unwanted feeling of paranoia, which we experience firsthand through learning about all these things in this presentation. The catch is that we have a false sense of control when it comes to the image that we project. Because as much as we can curate it, not all of our friends and acquaintances have the same sensors when it comes to their public image, and they can unwantedly or unknowingly share facets of us that we would rather have kept private. Recently, there's been an initiative on Facebook from its users, which consists in downloading a copy of their data, which has led to shocking discoveries of what kind of information the platform can hold, whether it's phone numbers, messages, or even photos and videos. Finally, through being monitored, people also tend to monitor those who are close to them, whether it's a parent tracking their child or a person checking on its significant other's messages. It's just something natural. A solution which would help avoid living in constant fear would be to constantly stop watching and sharing bits and pieces of our lives.